The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Wade Rawlins rode across the desolate plains of Montana Territory, the weight of grief sitting heavy on his shoulders like the dust that coated his worn denim. The year was 1879, and Wade hadn't spoken more than 10 words in the 3 months since he'd buried his wife and young son, victims of the scarlet fever that had swept through Broken Ridge like a wildfire. Wade guided his horse toward the shambles of what had once been a thriving cattle ranch. The 2-story farmhouse stood weathered and neglected, much like the man himself. At 32, Wade had the appearance of someone much older. His once bright blue eyes had dulled, his dark hair now streaked with premature gray, and the lines etched around his mouth spoke of a man who had forgotten how to smile. "Come on, Barrel," Wade muttered to his chestnut stallion as they approached the barn. "Let's get you settled before dark." The ranch had once been the pride of the territory, the Rocking R, they'd called it. Wade and his late wife Sarah had built it from nothing after coming west from Pennsylvania in '72. They'd had dreams as vast as the Montana sky, and for a while, those dreams had flourished along with their cattle herd and their young son, Thomas. Now, all that remained were 3 scrawny cows, a handful of chickens, and fields that had gone to seed. As Wade unsaddled Barrel, the sound of an approaching wagon caught his attention. Visitors were rare out here, 15 miles from town. He stepped out of the barn, hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip, eyes squinting against the setting sun. The wagon came slowly up the road, a single figure perched on its bench. As it drew closer, Wade could make out the shape of a woman, her bonnet tilted against the wind, his brow furrowed in confusion. He wasn't expecting anyone, and women traveling alone in this territory was unusual and dangerous. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and the woman set the brake before climbing down. She was dressed in a simple blue dress, dusty from travel. When she turned toward him, Wade felt something he hadn't felt in months, a flicker of interest. "Afternoon," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "Is this the Rocking R Ranch? I'm looking for Mr. Wade Rawlins." Wade stepped forward, his boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt. "I'm Rawlins. What's your business here, madam?" The woman approached, and as she drew closer, Wade could see she was perhaps in her late 20s, with chestnut hair peeking out from her bonnet and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, which she did now, revealing a small gap between her front teeth that somehow made the smile all the more genuine. "Mr. Rawlins, my name is Katherine James. I'm answering your advertisement in the Broken Ridge Gazette for a housekeeper and cook." She extended a gloved hand. "Though I must say, your property is a good deal larger than the advertisement suggested." Wade stared at her hand for a moment before awkwardly taking it. Her grip was firmer than he expected. "There must be some mistake, Miss James. I place no such advertisement." Catherine's smile faltered slightly. "No advertisement? But I have it here." She reached into her pocket and produced a folded newspaper clipping. Wade took it, scanning the neatly printed words. "Seeking capable housekeeper and cook for ranch outside Broken Ridge. Room and board plus modest salary. Inquire at the Rocking R Ranch, Wade Rawlins, proprietor." "I didn't write this," Wade said, his voice hard. "Someone's playing a joke, and not a funny one. I suggest you head back to town before nightfall." Catherine's smile disappeared completely now, replaced by a look of dismay. "Back to town? Mr. Rawlins, I've just traveled 3 days from Helena. I sold most of what I owned to make this journey." "That's unfortunate, but it ain't my problem." Wade turned to go back to the barn, then stopped when he heard her voice again, softer this time. "Your barn door is hanging by one hinge. Mr. Rawlins, your fields are overgrown, and judging by the state of your house, I'd say you haven't had a proper meal in months." Her voice grew stronger. "Advertisement or not, it appears to me you could use help." Wade turned slowly, studying the woman. There was no pity in her eyes, just a straightforward assessment that he found he couldn't argue with. Still, the thought of someone in his house, disrupting the quiet misery he'd built around himself, was intolerable. "I appreciate your concern, Miss James, but—" "Mrs.," she corrected. "Mrs. James, I'm a widow." Wade nodded, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "Mrs. James, then. As I was saying, I don't need help. I manage fine on my own." Katherine glanced pointedly at the sad state of the ranch, then back at him. "Do you?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, and Wade found he had no ready answer. The truth was, he wasn't managing at all. He was existing, nothing more. 1 week, Katherine said, breaking the silence. Give me 1 week to prove my worth. If at the end of that time you still wish me to leave, I'll go without argument. But I've nowhere else to turn tonight, and you'd not send a woman alone into the wilderness after sundown, would you, Mr. Rawlins? Wade sighed heavily, knowing he was being maneuvered, but unable to see a way out that wouldn't make him feel like the worst kind of heel. 1 night, he countered. You can stay in the spare room tonight, and I'll take you to town in the morning. Katherine's smile returned, brightening her entire face. I accept your terms, Mr. Rawlins. Now, might I trouble you to help with my trunk? After which, I'd like to see the kitchen. I imagine you're hungry for something other than beans and jerky. Before Wade could respond, she was already moving back to the wagon, her steps light and purposeful. He watched her go, feeling as though a whirlwind had just swept into his life, unwelcome, unexpected, but somehow impossible to resist. The spare room had been Thomas's, and Wade hadn't set foot in it since the day of the funeral. He stood in the doorway now, watching as Katherine set down her small carpet bag. This will do nicely, she said, turning to face him. Her smile faltered when she saw the rocking horse in the corner and the small clothes still folded on the dresser. Oh, she said softly. This was my son's, Wade finished, his throat tight. Thomas. He was 5. Katherine nodded, her eyes gentle. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Rawlins. Truly. If you'd rather I sleep elsewhere? No, Wade said quickly. It's fine. It's just a room now. The lie burned his throat. Katherine seemed to understand, not pushing further. I'll freshen up and then see about dinner. I noticed you have chickens. Perhaps I could make an omelet? Wade hadn't had eggs in weeks, though the chickens laid daily. He simply couldn't bring himself to gather them. That would be fine, he said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. As he made his way back downstairs, Wade caught a glimpse of himself in the small mirror in the hallway. His beard was unkempt, his clothes filthy. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of shame. Without thinking too deeply about why, he changed direction and headed for the wash basin. Katherine's first full day at the Rocking R dawned bright and clear. Wade awoke to the unfamiliar smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving about in the kitchen below. For a disorienting moment, he thought Sarah had returned, and his heart leapt. Then reality crashed down, and he remembered the persistent widow who had arrived on his doorstep the evening before. He dressed quickly and made his way downstairs, prepared to tell Mrs. James that their arrangement was at an end, and he would take her to town, as promised. The words died on his lips as he entered the kitchen. The room, which had been a disaster of unwashed dishes and spoiled food, was spotless. The wooden table gleamed, the floor was swept, and the windows were thrown open to let in the morning air. Katherine stood at the stove, her back to him, humming softly as she tended to something that smelled better than anything Wade had eaten in months. Good morning, Mr. Rawlins, she said without turning. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of gathering eggs and milking your cow. Poor thing was practically begging for relief. Wade blinked. He hadn't milked the cow in days, telling himself he'd get to it later. You know how to milk a cow? Katherine turned now, that warm smile lighting her face. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, Mr. Rawlins. I can milk a cow, mend a fence, and deliver a calf if need be. She gestured to the table, where a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon waited alongside fresh bread. Please sit. The coffee's hot. Wade sat, feeling strangely out of place in his own kitchen. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for him. About our arrangement, he began, but Katherine held up a hand. After breakfast, she said firmly. A man can't think straight on an empty stomach. Wade found he couldn't argue with that logic. He ate in silence, surprised by how hungry he was. Katherine joined him, eating modestly and refilling his coffee cup without being asked. When he'd finished, she cleared the dishes and then sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. Now, she said, about our arrangement, I propose a modification. Wade raised an eyebrow. Do you now? Katherine nodded. 1 week, as I suggested yesterday. During that time, I'll cook, clean, and help with whatever chores need doing. At the end of the week, if you still wish me to leave, I will. But I think you'll find I'm quite useful to have around." Wade studied her. In the morning light, he could see faint freckles across her nose and a small scar on her chin. There was something about her direct gaze that made it difficult to dismiss her. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mrs. James?" Catherine's expression grew more serious. "A place to stay for one. As I mentioned, I've nowhere else to go at present, and—" She hesitated. "And I find I need to be useful, Mr. Rawlins. Idleness doesn't suit me." There was something in her tone that Wade recognized a person running from grief, looking for something to fill the void. He knew that feeling all too well. "1 week," he agreed finally. "But I work alone with the cattle and the horses. You stick to the house." Catherine's smile returned. "Thank you, Mr. Rawlins. You won't regret it." Wade wasn't so sure about that, but as he rode out to check the fence line that morning, he found himself thinking about the warm kitchen and the woman who had somehow transformed it overnight. It was the first time in months that his thoughts hadn't immediately gone to his losses. By the third day, Wade had to admit that Katherine James was as good as her word. The house was cleaner than it had been, even when Sarah was alive. The meals were hearty and delicious, the laundry washed and pressed, and somehow Katherine had even managed to coax the vegetable garden back to life. More surprisingly, Wade found himself talking to her. Not about anything important at first, just comments about the weather or the taste of the food, but gradually as they sat on the porch in the evenings. He began to tell her about the ranch, how he and Sarah had built it from nothing, the dreams they'd had for its future. Katherine listened without interruption, her face animated with genuine interest. When he spoke of his plans to expand the herd come spring, she nodded thoughtfully. "You'll need help," she observed. "More than just me in the house." Wade glanced at her, surprised. "So, you're staying beyond the week?" Catherine's cheeks colored slightly. "I meant hypothetically, of course, if I were to stay." Wade found himself smiling for the first time in months. "Of course." On the morning of the 5th day, Wade came downstairs to find Katherine already dressed for riding, her skirt replaced with a pair of men's trousers that had been altered to fit her slim frame. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing to her outfit. "You said you needed to check the north pasture fence today," she replied, pouring him coffee. "I thought I might accompany you." Wade frowned. "I told you, I work alone with the cattle." Katherine set the coffee pot down, with perhaps more force than necessary. "Mr. Rawlins, I've been here 5 days, and in that time, I've seen exactly how much work needs doing on this ranch. Work that can't be accomplished by one man alone, no matter how stubborn." Her voice softened. "I'm not trying to intrude on your grief, but I am trying to help you save what's left of your livelihood." Wade stared at her, taken aback by her directness. "And what do you know about ranching, Mrs. James?" "More than you might think. My late husband and I ran a small ranch in Colorado before he died. I can ride, rope, and mend fences with the best of them." Her chin lifted slightly. "And I'm a fair shot, if it comes to that." Wade studied her for a long moment, noting the determination in her eyes. "Fine," he said finally. "But you follow my lead, understand?" Catherine's smile was an answer enough. They rode out together, Katherine astride Wade's second-best horse, a gentle mare named Daisy. Wade was surprised to see that Katherine rode well, sitting easily in the saddle with the confidence of someone who had spent plenty of time on horseback. The north pasture was the furthest from the house, a stretch of rolling grassland bordered by a creek. It was also where the fence was in the worst repair, with several sections completely down. "This is why your cattle keep wandering," Katherine observed as they dismounted near a particularly bad section. "You need at least 3 men working full-time to get these fences back in order." Wade grunted as he pulled tools from his saddlebag. "Don't have 3 men, don't have the money to hire 3 men. Katherine pushed her hat back, wiping sweat from her brow. "What about taking on a partner, someone who could invest in the ranch?" Wade handed her a pair of work gloves. "Tried that once. Man named Blackstone wanted to buy half my land last year, offered a fair price too, but something about him didn't sit right. Found out later he was buying up small ranches all over the territory, then forcing the partners out. I wasn't about to let that happen to the Rocking R." Katherine pulled on the gloves. "That was wise, but there must be someone in Broken Ridge you could trust." Wade began to hammer a loose post back into place. Trust is hard to come by out here. They worked in companionable silence for a while, making decent progress on the fence. Wade found himself impressed by Katherine's skill and stamina. She didn't complain about the heat or the hard work, and she handled the tools with practiced ease. As they took a break to drink from their canteens, Wade found himself studying Katherine's profile. She had removed her hat, and the sun caught the red highlights in her chestnut hair. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and without thinking, Wade reached out to brush it away. Katherine went very still at his touch, her eyes widening slightly. Wade pulled his hand back quickly, embarrassed by the impulse. "Sorry," he muttered. There was dirt. Katherine smiled, that warm smile that somehow made the day brighter. "No need to apologize, Mr. Rawlins. I'm sure I'm a frightful mess." "No," Wade said, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. You look fine." Something passed between them in that moment, a current of understanding that made Wade both uncomfortable and intrigued. He cleared his throat and stood, reaching for the tools. "We should finish up. Storms brewing to the west." Indeed, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a heavy rainfall before nightfall. They worked quickly to complete the section they had started, and were just finishing when the first fat raindrops began to fall. "We need to find shelter," Wade called over the rising wind. "The creek floods in heavy rain. We'll be cut off from the house." Katherine nodded, hurrying to secure the tools in the saddlebag. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through their clothing. Wade pointed to a stand of cottonwoods about a quarter-mile away. "There's an old line shack over there. Not much, but it'll keep us dry." They mounted quickly and rode through the intensifying downpour, reaching the small wooden structure just as lightning split the sky overhead. Wade dismounted and led the horses to a lean-to on the side of the shack, while Katherine pushed open the creaking door. The line shack was a single room with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. It smelled musty from disuse, but it was dry and solid. "It's not much," Wade said as he entered, shaking water from his hat. "But it'll do until the storm passes." Katherine was already examining the fireplace. "There's wood here, and it seems dry enough. We should get a fire going before we catch our death." Wade nodded, impressed once again by her practicality. He set about starting a fire, while Katherine took inventory of the shack's meager supplies. "Look," she said, opening a cabinet beside the fireplace. "Someone left coffee and beans, and here's a pot. We won't starve, at least." The fire caught quickly, casting a warm glow throughout the small space. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the plains. Wade and Katherine stood before the fire, their wet clothes steaming slightly. "You should get out of those wet things," Wade said, then immediately felt his face flush as Katherine's eyebrows rose. "I mean, there are some old clothes in that trunk. Probably belong to one of the ranch hands. They'll be too big. But they're dry." Katherine's smile held a touch of amusement. "Thank you, Mr. Rawlins. I think I will change. Would you mind turning around?" Wade obliged, facing the wall, as he heard the rustle of fabric behind him. He tried not to think about the woman undressing just a few feet away, but his mind betrayed him, conjuring images that made his collar feel suddenly tight despite being soaked through. "You can turn around now," Katherine said after a few minutes. Wade turned to find her dressed in a man's flannel shirt that hung to her knees, her wet hair loose around her shoulders. She had rolled up the sleeves and was in the process of spreading her wet clothes near the fire to dry. "Your turn," she said, nodding toward the trunk. "I promise not to peek." Wade changed quickly, grateful for the dry clothes even if they were a bit musty. When he turned back, Katherine was heating water in the pot over the fire. "Coffee will be ready soon," she said, "and I found some jerky in the saddlebag that survived the rain." They sat at the small table, sipping hot coffee and sharing the jerky as the storm continued outside. The line shack was snug enough with the fire going, and Wade found himself relaxing despite the close quarters. "Tell me about your husband," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Katherine looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "William was a good man, kind. We were married 6 years before the fever took him." Her voice was steady, but Wade could see the grief in her eyes. That was 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Wade said, meaning it. Katherine nodded. As I am for your losses. How long were you and Sarah married? 10 years, Wade replied. We came west right after the wedding. She was everything to me, her and Thomas. He swallowed hard, the familiar ache of loss rising in his throat. Katherine reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It doesn't get easier, she said softly, but it gets different. The pain becomes a part of you, like a scar that aches when the weather changes. Wade looked at their hands, hers small and pale against his tanned, calloused one. Does it ever stop hurting? Katherine's fingers tightened slightly on his. I don't know. I hope not in some ways. The pain means we haven't forgotten them. Wade met her eyes, seeing in them an understanding that no one else had offered him. Not pity. Not empty platitudes about time healing all wounds, but a true recognition of the depth of his grief because she had lived it too. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. Katherine smiled, that warm smile that had begun to feel like sunrise after a long night. For what? For not telling me it gets better. She squeezed his hand once more before withdrawing hers. I would never lie to you, Mr. Rawlins. The storm lasted well into the night, forcing them to remain in the line shack. Wade insisted Katherine take the cot, while he made a pallet on the floor near the fire. Despite his exhaustion, he found sleep elusive, too aware of the woman breathing softly just a few feet away. When he did finally drift off, he dreamed of Sarah, but for the first time, it wasn't the dream of her dying, of him unable to save her and Thomas. Instead, she was standing in a field of wildflowers, smiling at him. It's time to live again, Wade, she said in the dream, her voice as clear as if she stood beside him. We'll always be with you, but you need to live. Wade awoke with tears on his cheeks and a strange lightness in his chest, as if something tight had begun to loosen. The morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Wade and Katherine rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, the experience in the line shack having shifted something between them. Wade found himself glancing at her more often, noticing the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the gentle curve of her profile. As they approached the ranch, Wade was startled to see a wagon in the yard and a man pacing back and forth on the porch. Expecting company? Katherine asked. Wade shook his head, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. Stay behind me. They approached cautiously, but as they drew closer, Wade recognized the figure. It's Doc Wilson from town, he said, relaxing slightly. Wonder what brings him out here. Dr. Wilson was a portly man in his 60s with a bushy white beard and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He hurried down the steps as Wade and Katherine rode into the yard. Wade Rawlins, where in tarnation have you been? The doctor demanded. I've been waiting since dawn. Wade dismounted. Got caught in the storm, Doc. What brings you all the way out here? The doctor's eyes moved to Katherine, widening in surprise. Well, I'll be. It worked. Wade frowned. What worked? Dr. Wilson beamed. The advertisement, my boy. I see Mrs. James found you after all. Wade stared at the doctor, understanding dawning. You placed that advertisement without my permission? The doctor had the grace to look somewhat abashed. Now, Wade, don't get your dander up. I was worried about you. We all were. After Sarah and Thomas, he cleared his throat. Well, a man shouldn't be alone with grief like that. I heard Mrs. James was looking for a position after her husband passed, and I thought you two might be good for each other. Wade was torn between anger at the interference and grudging appreciation for the doctor's concern. He glanced at Katherine, who looked equally surprised. You knew about this? He asked her. Katherine shook her head. Not at all. The advertisement was in the Helena newspaper. I had no idea it wasn't placed by you directly. Dr. Wilson looked back and forth between them, his expression hopeful. So, has it worked out? You're still here after 5 days, Mrs. James, which I take as a positive sign. Before either could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. 3 men on horseback were coming fast up the road, and Wade immediately recognized the lead rider, Clayton Blackstone, the man who had tried to buy half his ranch the year before. Trouble, Wade muttered, instinctively moving to stand in front of Katherine. Blackstone reined in his horse hard, sending dust flying. He was a tall man, with cold eyes and a meticulously groomed mustache. His clothes were expensive, his gun belt polished and prominently displayed. "Rawlins," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Thought you might have reconsidered my offer by now. Word in town is, you're about to lose this place." Wade's jaw tightened. "You heard wrong, Blackstone. The Rocking R isn't for sale, not half, not all." Blackstone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is that so? Because I heard you haven't made a mortgage payment in 3 months. Bank's getting impatient." Wade felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. It was true that he'd fallen behind on payments after Sarah and Thomas died, but he hadn't realized the word had gotten around. "My financial arrangements with the bank are none of your business," Wade said, his voice hard. Blackstone chuckled, a sound without humor. "They are when I buy your note from the bank, which I intend to do first thing tomorrow morning. Then you'll have exactly 1 week to pay in full, or this land becomes mine." Wade's hand inched toward his gun. But Katherine stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Blackstone, is it?" she said, her voice steady. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Katherine James, Mr. Rawlins' business partner." All eyes turned to Katherine in surprise, Wade's most of all. She continued without missing a beat. "I've recently invested in the Rocking R, and I can assure you that all financial obligations will be met in a timely manner, so your services won't be required." Blackstone's eyes narrowed as he studied Katherine. "Partner? Since when does Rawlins have a partner?" "That's not your concern," Katherine replied coolly. "What is your concern is that you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before we're forced to involve the sheriff." Wade had never seen anyone stand up to Blackstone so directly, and certainly not a woman. The rancher's face darkened with anger, but after a tense moment, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over, Rawlins," he called over his shoulder as he rode away, his men following closely. When they had disappeared down the road, Wade turned to Katherine. "Business partner?" Katherine's confident demeanor slipped slightly. "I may have exaggerated a bit." Dr. Wilson chuckled. "Exaggerated or not, you certainly sent Blackstone packing with his tail between his legs. Not many can do that." Wade wasn't smiling. "He'll be back, and he wasn't bluffing about the mortgage. The bank's been patient because of what happened. But they won't wait forever." Katherine's expression grew thoughtful. "How much do you owe, Wade?" It was the first time she had used his given name, and despite the gravity of the situation, Wade felt a small thrill at the sound of it on her lips. $500, he admitted, plus another $300 in back interest. Dr. Wilson whistled low. "That's a hefty sum." Katherine nodded slowly. "It is, but not impossible." She turned to Wade, her eyes serious. "Mr. Rawlins, Wade, I have a proposition for you. A real one this time, not an exaggeration for Blackstone's benefit." Wade raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I have $800, Katherine said. "It's everything I got from selling my husband's ranch in Colorado. I'll pay off your mortgage." "I can't accept that," Wade interrupted, his pride stinging. "You didn't let me finish," Katherine said firmly. "I'll pay off your mortgage in exchange for a true partnership. Half ownership of the Rocking R." Wade stared at her, stunned. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." Katherine's expression softened. "I know enough. I know you're a good man who's had more than his share of tragedy. I know this ranch has potential, and I know that I need a home and a purpose as much as you need a partner and a friend." She paused. "Think about it. You don't have to answer right away." With that, she turned and walked toward the house, leaving Wade and Dr. Wilson staring after her. "That," the doctor said after a moment, "is quite a woman." Wade nodded slowly. "Yes. Yes, she is." That evening, after Dr. Wilson had departed with a knowing smile and a promise to return, soon Wade found Katherine sitting on the porch swing. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over the ranch. Wade sat beside her, the swing creaking slightly under his weight. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Did you mean it?" Wade asked finally. "About the partnership?" Katherine nodded, her profile serene in the fading light. "Every word. I have the money, and I need something to invest it in, something to believe in. Wade turned to face her more directly. Why here? Why me? Katherine met his gaze steadily. Because from the moment I rode up to this ranch, even in its state of neglect, I could see what it once was and what it could be again. And because... She hesitated, then continued more softly. Because I recognize the look in your eyes, Wade Rawlins. It's the same one I saw in my mirror every day after William died. Emptiness. Despair. The feeling that everything good in life had ended. Wade swallowed hard, unable to deny the truth of her words. But it doesn't have to stay that way, Katherine continued, her voice gaining strength. We can help each other, rebuild this ranch, and maybe... She took a deep breath. Maybe rebuild our lives too. Wade looked out across the land that had once been his dream and Sarah's. In the last few days, with Katherine here, he had begun to feel something stirring inside him again. Not just grief, but hope, possibility. Partners then, he said, turning back to her and extending his hand. Katherine's smile was like the sunrise, warm and full of promise as she placed her hand in his. But instead of shaking it, Wade found himself holding it, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Katherine, he said, her name feeling right on his tongue. I need you to know something. If we do this, if we become partners, I don't know if I can ever offer more than that. Sarah and Thomas. I understand, Katherine said gently. I'm not asking for anything more than a partnership, Wade. The rest will be what it will be, in its own time. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Wade's chest. He nodded, still holding her hand. Then we have a deal, Mrs. James. Katherine smiled again, that gap-toothed smile that had somehow become the brightest part of his days. I believe partners should use first names, don't you think, Wade? Wade felt a smile tugging at his own lips, an unfamiliar sensation after so many months of grief. I reckon they should. Katherine. The following months brought changes to the rocking R that Wade could scarcely have imagined that stormy day in the line shack. With Katherine's money, they paid off the mortgage and had enough left to hire 2 Hands brothers from town, named Jeb and Eli Carson. The 4 of them worked from dawn till dusk, repairing fences, tending the growing herd, and bringing the ranch back to life. Katherine proved to be as capable outside as she was in the house. She rode alongside the men most days, her skin tanning in the summer sun, her hands calloused from work. But she also transformed the house, making it a home again, with small touches that Wade might not have noticed individually, but that collectively changed the very feeling of the place. Fresh curtains appeared at the windows. Wildflowers in jars brightened the table. The smell of baking bread and stew replaced the musty emptiness. And gradually, Wade found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, to sitting across from Katherine at dinner and sharing the day's events. They talked often about everything and nothing. Wade told her stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of his journey west with Sarah. Katherine spoke of growing up in Missouri, of meeting William at a county fair when she was just 17. They shared their grief, but increasingly, they shared their hopes as well. As summer turned to fall, Wade realized something had changed within him. The pain of losing Sarah and Thomas hadn't disappeared. Katherine had been right about that. It had become a part of him, like a scar that would always remain. But alongside it, new feelings had taken root and begun to grow. He found himself watching Katherine when she wasn't looking, admiring the way she moved with grace even in men's work clothes, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the gentle strength in her hands. At night, he would lie awake thinking about her in the room across the hall, wondering if she ever thought of him as more than a partner and friend. The answer came on a crisp October evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. The harvest moon hung low and golden in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Katherine was knitting, her needles clicking softly as she worked on a scarf for the coming winter. "Wade," she said, without looking up from her work, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Wade set down the cup of coffee he'd been nursing. "What's that?" Katherine's needles stilled. "Are you happy? Not just content, but truly happy?" The question caught him off guard. He considered it carefully before answering. "I didn't think I could be again," he said honestly. After Sarah and Thomas, I thought that part of my life was over. But lately, he paused, gathering his courage. Lately, I've found myself feeling something I thought was lost forever. Katherine looked up now, her eyes searching his face. And what is that? Hope, Wade said simply. Joy even, and it's because of you, Katherine. The knitting slipped from her hands as Katherine's eyes widened. Wade, I don't expect anything, he continued quickly. I know we agreed to a partnership, nothing more. And if that's all you want, I'll respect that. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I started to feel again. To care again. He took a deep breath. To love again. Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For a long, terrible moment, she said nothing, and Wade feared he had ruined everything. Then she reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and sure. I've been afraid to hope, she whispered, afraid to believe that what I was feeling might be returned. Wade's heart hammered in his chest. What are you feeling, Katherine? Her smile was tremulous but real. Love, Wade Rawlins. I'm feeling love. Wade moved closer on the swing, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. I never thought I'd get a second chance at happiness, he murmured. Never thought I'd find someone who understood both my grief and my hope. We understand each other, Katherine said softly. We've both walked through the fire and come out the other side. Wade leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Katherine met him halfway, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as years of loneliness and sorrow gave way to the promise of something new. When they finally broke apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, not just as my partner, but as my wife, if you'll have me. Katherine's laugh was half sob, half joy. Yes, she said, her smile radiant in the moonlight. Yes, I'll stay. 3 years later, Wade stood on the porch of the Rocking R, watching as Katherine chased their 2-year-old daughter, Rose, through the garden. The little girl's laughter rang out across the yard, a sound that still amazed Wade every time he heard it. The ranch had prospered beyond his wildest expectations. The herd had tripled in size, the fields yielded abundant hay, and they had even added an orchard that was beginning to bear fruit. The house had been expanded, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. Katherine caught Rose and swung her up into her arms, the child's dark curls so like her mother's bouncing as she squealed in delight. Katherine looked up, catching Wade's eye, and smiled that gap-toothed smile that had first captured his heart on a lonely afternoon when hope seemed lost. "Papa," Rose called, waving frantically. "Come see the butterflies." Wade descended the steps and crossed to his wife and daughter. As he wrapped his arms around them both, he marveled at how life could change, how a family could rise from ashes, how a warm smile and a determined spirit could bring a broken man back to life. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Katherine asked, reaching up to smooth the furrow from his brow. Wade kissed her gently, then pressed another kiss to Rose's chubby cheek. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory," he said, "and that I'm mighty glad you decided to stay." Katherine's eyes, warm and loving, met his. "Best decision I ever made," she said softly. And as the sun set on the Rocking R, Wade Rawlins knew with absolute certainty that his family, once lost, had truly risen from the ashes, reborn in the heart of a woman whose warm smile had changed everything.